They're schemers. Schemers trying to control their little worlds. I'm not a schemer. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other. And here we go.
Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you are all well. You're amazing, beautiful, wonderful people. You're looking absolutely amazing on this terrific Tuesday, and I'm going to get straight into the meat and potatoes as I did a real long video earlier. If you missed it, go and check that out. We spoke about Jeff Nye and looked at Jeff Nye's interview. And yeah, it was an eye-opener, especially if one part of that interview was accurate. I'm still kind of trying to get my head around whether I heard what I thought I heard. Again, if you know what I'm talking about, let me know down below. And that was whether indeed Professor Green, was involved in the plea deal. But anyway, what we're talking about in this one, we're talking about this. Again, we know that Bill Thompson is doing the rounds. He's doing some interviews and he says some interesting things here. And it's really interesting to listen to some of his answers to the questions that are put to him. First of all, we just need to understand who Bill Thompson is. Look, it says, well, I didn't feel like I wanted to be at the center of this case. So it's really just a team effort. This was a huge team effort. I've been prosecutor for 30 years now. I've never seen this degree of coordination with agencies like the FBI and the Idaho State Police, as well as our Moscow Police Department. And it's funny here, he's asked, you're the quarterback, kind of the team captain, and all of that social media pressure. Did you feel that during the course of all this? Did you pay any attention to it, or did you just try to brush that aside? He says, actually, I don't watch social media. We made our decisions based on what the law was and what the evidence was. And frankly, we were pretty successful at insulating ourselves from that, from what the swings of public opinion might be out there on the internet. And I'm thinking to myself, I know he's pretty old, but I didn't realize he was senile as fuck. They literally had to do a change of venue because of the media. There's a huge leak that I would hope is still being investigated to this day. Hopefully that is happening. I would hope that hasn't just been ignored. So the fact that he's saying that they insulated themselves from what the swings of public opinion might be out on the internet, I feel is a little bit of an odd statement to make. But this is the most important statement that he makes here. He talks about the murders themselves, right? And what we have to, before we just dig into this, why is this so important? This is important because Idaho is a death penalty state. We must appreciate that. We must understand it. And we also must understand that around the time of the Bryan Kohberger journey, if you like, they took $1 million or close to $1 million of taxpayers' money, and they spent it on upgrading and updating their death penalty chamber, the firing squad chamber. They had shown that they were being resilient to any request to avoid the death penalty, showing that is what they wanted, that the crime warranted it, and that is absolutely, undeniably the route that they are taking. They are taking this to trial, and they are going to try to execute this individual. Now, Jeff Nye, in the interview that I covered earlier, he would even turn around and say that he was shocked. The thing that was shocked him the most was Bryan Kohberger's guilty plea. And then we go back to what Thompson says here. And this, to me, doesn't make sense. It says, these crimes, these murders were brutal. We've seen plenty of homicides, and each one is different. But this is one that you'll never be able to erase from your eyes and from your memory. It says, were you actually inside that house while the victims were still present? He says, yes. Ashley Jennings, my senior deputy, and I were both on scene on November 13th. So this is the lead prosecutor of this case. He is on scene. They're in the house. We were working with the investigators and seeing firsthand what was going on with the crime scene looked like. It's part of our philosophy. We work with our officers right from the very beginning. It brings with it some challenges, and this certainly brought physically emotional challenges with it. Now, could that have led to potential confirmation bias because you have now become incredibly emotionally tied up in this case? It's possible. But look, you've also been in the same room as Brian Coburg. You've looked into this man's eyes and you've watched his reactions during these victims' impact statements. What did you see? I saw nothing in Brian Coburg. While the impact statements were going on, it's as though his eyes were empty. He made eye contact with each of these people completely unmoved. No reaction, no remorse, no tears. What does that tell you about this man? What is inside him, if anything? I don't know how to answer that. He's an enigma to me. The evil that he committed is incomprehensible. The many cases when I'm in court, I'm engaging directly with the defendant. I think I did it once at the sentencing, and that was just to point out that he was going to leave prison, or he wasn't going to leave prison until he was dead, and that was it. I don't care to interact with him again. I'd be happy to never hear his voice again, never see him. Bill, I want you to answer a question. I know we've been asked this already a bunch of times, but as you well know, everyone, the families and friends of those students, the public at large, everyone is vexed by the question of why did he do this? Do you have a theory? I don't know why he did this early on in the investigation when we had folks from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, their profilers. They were helping with the investigation in the first few weeks as they were looking at the case. Even just the little we knew when they were telling us, in all likelihood, we would never find out or understand why this occurred, or even if the murders or the murderer were to tell us the reasons, that in all likelihood it wouldn't make sense to ordinary people like ourselves. So this is Bill Thompson basically saying, look, nothing that they investigated, there was no indication of why this was done. There was nothing to explain it away. There was nothing which comes from the fact that there was no connection. If you have no connection, you have no trail that leads this individual to these victims. Him, by his own admission, said he could have picked this house completely at random just before the crime took place. That is how little evidence they had of anything to do with Brian Coburg being connected to this case, which goes back to that. The knife sheath is the only real thing that ties him into this crime. Now, it's whether you accept that or whether you don't accept it, who knows? But the point being here is, if this was such a heinous crime, if he was so emotionally tied into it, where he had been at the crime scene, he had seen these victims, he had seen the aftermath of it, and you are a death penalty state, you are the lead prosecutor, and you are spending 2.5 years saying that we are going to execute this individual. This is disgusting, and you know, I have so much skin in the game. I need to ask the question, and that is, why, after 2.5 years, did they decide that they were not going to execute this individual? And don't tell me it's because they wanted to spare the families, because that just ain't going to wash. That is not going to wash. What were they protecting? What were they scared of? Because they were scared of something. That is the only thing that makes sense. Let me know down below what you think, and I'll catch the members later when we go live. Love you all. Mwah.